What's up, everybody? This is David, and you're listening to the Plant Medicine for PTSD podcast. My guest today is someone I was very excited to speak with because it's always interesting for me to meet somebody who has been working in this field longer than Cordy and I have been alive. And that's not just a backhanded way of calling John old, we'll say experienced. So, my guest today is a gentleman named John Osborne, who, as you will learn about in this episode, has been traveling the world teaching meditation and breath work for many, many, many decades. And our paths crossed because John also works with veterans. Interestingly, he does a good amount of work with Vietnam era veterans who I think get overlooked quite a bit, but a lot of them are still kicking and have still been dealing with a lot of issues for a lot of years. So the work that John does is really awesome. You can learn a lot more about him by checking out the Art of Living Foundation. John's a really interesting guy. He also does a lot of work with devotional music like chanting, kirtan, and different instruments that he plays. Um, you will experience in this podcast a unique blend of my interest in etymology and words and my general nerdiness there, and my limited knowledge but fascination with the Sanskrit language and everything that I've learned from the Bhagavad Gita on that front. So this episode, we might stray a little bit into some esoteric shit that you find really boring or difficult to follow at various points, but I try to reel us back in and hopefully leave you with some interesting takeaways and some actionable takeaways if you have been wanting to get into more of a meditative practice. John is certainly a great resource for that. He's got a lot of wisdom to share just from his experience of doing this for so long, and I certainly enjoyed getting to know him, and I hope to do more with him in the future. So without further ado, let's get into this episode with my buddy John and learn all about his practice of meditation. Good morning,
Good
Mr.
morning.
John Osborne. I appreciate you doing this again, man. I was telling my wife Cordy about you, and anytime that we get to speak with somebody like yourself who's been in this business, frankly, longer than I've been alive, it's always interesting to me to get some different perspectives, just that are born from nothing, or that, I'm sorry, that can't be born from anything other than your lived experience having done this for so long. So I really appreciate you taking some time to sit down with me.
Happy to be here.
And that was not subtly calling you old, by the way. I hope it didn't feel like that.
Okay. I
So
think venerable, not old. How's that?
there we go. I love it. John, remind me, where are you from? Because we are talking how you kind of spend your time on both coasts. Where did you actually grow up?
I grew up actually where I am right now in upstate New York, in Finger Lakes
Okay.
region, near Syracuse and Ithaca, central New York, if you know where that is.
I do. My dad went to college at Ithaca, and he always talked about how cold it was and how much snow there was. That was my
Yeah.
main takeaway.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
like
And
that.
so you had told me about how you had first gotten into meditation when you were what, like 17 on this trip that you went on?
Correct.
Can you walk me through that again? Because I was telling my wife that you were born in what, like 1951, 52, is that right?
Too, right.
Okay. And not too many people were meditating back then. So how did you get exposed to this?
Uh, the first experience that I had of interior silence was in the middle of a program called Outward Bound, which program which takes young people into the wilderness, teaching them wilderness skills, and also hopefully opening up something about learning more about themselves. And so I was 15 at that point, and in the middle of that program, which was in the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, I was put on my own for 3 days in silence, something called a solo. And something opened up deep inside of me when that happened. And I thought, wow, there's more to what's going on inside me than I'd experienced before. I dropped into a deeper place. And the next year, 2 years later, I was teaching a program like Outward Bound under the auspices of the Department of Interior for a bunch of kids from the inner city. And we were in the Green Mountains of Vermont. And it was a very challenging program because you were with the kids 24 hours a day and uh, no time off. Very demanding program, a lot of stress. And I noticed that one of my colleagues kind of glided through the program, really was good at working with the kids, never lost his sense of humor, always had a lot of energy. And I grabbed him one day and I said, how are you doing it? I thought maybe he was taking drugs or something, at the end of the 60s, right? And he said, it's this thing that I do when I close my eyes twice a day. And I said, wow, that sounds really strange. And he said, I know it sounds strange, but he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, for my sake, check it out when you get a chance. So I looked around for meditation teachers. It was hard to find one in those days. But my freshman year of college, I finally found one a few months later, started meditating, and then everything in my life changed after that.
Okay, so that first experience that you had, that was just sort of organic as a result of being alone for a few days and sort of stumbling upon what we might call like a meditative state. And then it wasn't
Yeah,
until later that you had any sort of directed way of getting there.
exactly. And it was not just being alone, it was being alone without any outside stimuli. Uh,
Mm.
no people, no phone, no TV, no nothing. Me in front of a campfire. And it really it really gave me an insight about how what goes on inside us affects our world and how we see our world and relate to other people and all those things.
Man, it's crazy how easy it would be, especially in the modern world, to go through your entire life on Earth and never get a glimpse of that. Because we're just constantly connected. There's constant distractions
You know,
everywhere.
when I was in a restaurant the other day and the parents next to me were trying to order and they had a small child, and what they did is they gave the small child their cell phone to play with,
Breaks
and
my
the kid
heart.
was 5 years old. And I thought, wow, not a great way to raise a small child.
No, I mean, do you have kids, John?
I don't.
Okay. As a parent of a 2-year-old, I can understand how people make that decision, man, like very much. And it's difficult for us. Our daughter has like extremely limited screen time. There's only a couple of shows she watches. And even when we shut the laptop, it's like screaming and crying and asking for it again after, 10 minutes of watching this low stimulation German cartoon that she's allowed to watch.
Right.
It's crazy, man. So, okay, so you had that experience when you were 17, got introduced to the idea of meditation around 19. And then what did you find from there? Was it a book? Was it some meditation classes? Like what was that personal journey like for you of getting into that?
It was a traveling meditation teacher, January of my freshman year. So I think I was about 17 at that time. And only because my friend, whom I had a lot of respect for, really asked me to check it out. I went to an introductory talk. It was a 3-day meditation course. And the first time I dropped into that place, it was a mantra meditation. It was like complete change in my understanding of myself
Mm.
because there's this level that we all live in where the outside world is kind of overshadowing us and lots of outside stimuli. And then there's another level where parts of us are overstimulating us, our thoughts, our emotions, our cravings, and our aversions. And then there's a deeper place, where there's not so much change. It's like dropping into the deep part of the ocean. And I had a tiny glimpse of that in that outward bound experience, but actually swimming in that ocean was a completely transformative experience for me.
Mm.
And being able to go back there after I was taught when I wanted to or needed to every day completely changed my outer world and my experience of it.
You must have had like that must have been a somewhat exciting time to be getting into this kind of stuff. Like it was almost like cutting edge in America. Like, and I mean, I guess just the 70s in general too, right? Like lots of new ideas and new ways of being swirling around. I listened to a lot of lectures from like Ram Dass and Alan Watts that were recorded back then, and that's always
Right.
my takeaway is like, man, it must have been really cool to be like a 20-year-old kid sitting in a Ram Dass lecture somewhere. And did you ever cross paths with anybody like that? Anyone that nowadays we might consider like a famous meditation teacher? I'm thinking that, Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Jack Kornfield, those kinds of guys.
I did have an experience with Jack Kornfield and some Buddhist teachers a little bit later in my life. And Alan Watts, in his writings, had a big effect on me early on. And of course, everybody read Be Here Now and Autobiography of a Yogi. There were all kinds of books like that, and
Yeah.
people were it was interesting. People were moving in different directions. Some people were trying to do it through drugs, and I had a lot of friends who did that. But I was not interested in drugs after I started meditating at all. I felt
Hmm.
like I got a much more authentic high or deeper experience from drugs and from uh, meditation than any. I hadn't tried drugs much, but whatever I tried, paled in comparison to what experiences I was having in meditation. So some
Interesting.
people went that way, and other people, went in a more spiritual way.
Hmm. Uh, are you familiar with a guy named Sam Harris at all?
I'm not.
Okay, he's you don't need to look him up. He's a meditation teacher, he's an author, he's a like hard neuroscience kind of a guy. He was one of the people that I gravitated to when I was learning how to meditate, and he's a hardcore atheist. And at this time in my life, I was dating a girl who was very Christian, and I would listen to Sam's podcast and then pick fights with her about why her God was fake based on all these arguments. It was a very good dynamic. But this guy got me so interested in neuroscience and the neuroscience of meditation that it actually led to an interest in psychedelics because he would talk about experiences with LSD and with MDMA and how it mirrored some of the meditative states that he got to. And so for me, my interest in psychedelics was actually born out of an interest in meditation. So I think the two can definitely go hand in hand. I feel like meditation is some of the best preparation for a psychedelic experience. But yeah, I could almost see how there would have been back then, especially a divergence where you see all of these hippies with their long hair dropping acid and like removing themselves from society. And you're like, I can do all that sitting here on a cushion and breathing for a little while. So I don't really need to do all of that crazy stuff that you guys are into. So I can appreciate that choice that you made.
There was there was somebody writing in the 50s. I'm trying to remember, Kerouac, I think, who
Mm,
said taking drugs. He said is like walking down a hall and getting glimpses into rooms, opening doors, getting glimpses into rooms down the hall. He said, but you'll never live in any of those rooms
yeah,
from drugs.
yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, meditation is a place where you can walk down the hall, you can explore the rooms, and eventually live in those rooms.
Man, I would completely agree with that categorization. I think a lot of the like horror stories of people ruining their lives with drugs are because they try living in those rooms permanently. But I agree with that. I think for us, the context that we look at it, I think psychedelics have a lot of value, just as you said, of giving you a glimpse into that room of somebody who we'll get to your work with veterans, but somebody who's suffering so much day in and day out. Psychedelics could give them a glimpse of a possible future where they're not constantly suffering, where they actually feel love for themselves, where they feel content, where they feel a connection with God. And now the real work is, well, how do I do that every day of my life? And I don't have to live at this retreat center in Costa Rica and still get some of that.
Right.
So, okay, so you're going to college, you're getting into meditation just personally for yourself. Where
Right.
does life take you from there? I know you spent some time in a monastery. I want to figure out how that happened. But so where do you go after college?
Uh, I learned to teach meditation after college. When I look back on my experience, the thing that amazes me is that I hadn't met any meditators almost my whole time through college. And you can imagine the college experience back then. There were so many things that could pull you away in other directions. But somehow that experience anchored me so much that I continued to do it every day. And then in my senior year of college, I met some other meditators and some meditation teachers. And I decided I wanted to share the meditation experience with other people. So after college, I learned to teach meditation and then eventually ended up in graduate school. I went to a private school where I had some really powerful experiences in a class that explored world religion. So I couldn't figure out what else I wanted to do with my life, but I thought, well, maybe I'll teach Outward Bound in the summers and I'll get a graduate degree in religious studies and teach religion or about world religions in the year, in the rest of the academic year. And that was sort of my vague plan. So I got accepted at Yale Divinity School, took a year off, learned to teach meditation, and also did some business because I was interested in being in business as well. And went back and was at Yale Divinity School for a couple of years. And a lot of people approached me saying, we're coming from a traditional religious background, most of them Christian. and you're teaching this meditation that doesn't necessarily come from a Christian tradition. How do you put those two together? And I was introduced to a fellow named Father Thomas Keating, who is a kind of leader in contemplative Christianity and also in religious dialogue. He had a lot of experiences with people like the Dalai Lama and Jack Kornfield. And we got together at his monastery and had some conversations about how people can integrate the experience of meditation into their traditional religious tradition. And some of those conversations got recorded, and eventually we decided to do a book together. It was called The Heart of the World, An Introduction to Contemplative Christianity. So I took a year off of Yale to finish that book and spent some time in the monastery, and eventually had an experience which seemed to invite me to have a deeper experience there. So I joined that community for 3 years.
Hmm.
And it was one of the most transformational experiences of my whole life. I regret not a moment of that experience.
That's beautiful. Where was that monastery?
Monastery was outside of Boston in a place called
Okay.
Spencer, Massachusetts. It was St. Joseph's Abbey.
Okay.
And eventually I was in another monastery in that order. They sent me out to help out at a smaller monastery in Snowmass, Colorado. So I spent about a year and a half in each of those places.
So were you living there like functioning day in and day out like as a monk in the monastery?
I was.
What was that like? Talk about being free from distractions. Like
It
that's a
was
very
very,
simple life, right?
it was very different. It was very different. No distraction. Well, anytime you're in a community with other people, even if you're in silence most of the time, there's going to be some distractions. Humanity being what humanity is. But I had some very powerful spiritual experiences in the monastery, and I also learned a lot about myself. Imagine that you're, living 24 hours a day with another community of people, some of whom you naturally gravitate to, some of which maybe you bump up against sometimes, and nobody's going anywhere. You can't leave because those people are there. And actually, you figure out eventually that they're a great mirror for you. And so you
Mm,
learn some things about yourself that you wouldn't learn other places. And I was at the point of taking some further commitment in that life when the abbot of the monastery in Snowmass sat me down and said, "You seem to be doing pretty well here, but we think you have experience or some gifts at working with other people and maybe teaching or being in a world with other people that you might not be able to explore here. So why don't you go out for a year, see what that's like, and if you still want to come back and try it out again, do that. But we think that you have gifts at working with other people that you might not be able to use in the monastery." At
interesting.
that moment, I was pretty heartbroken. It wasn't my idea to leave, but I left and I never came back, never went back.
It's a very gentle, loving way to kick somebody out if you didn't want them there.
Right.
Hey, John,
I
I
don't think
think
it was that
you're
they didn't want me there. I
I
think
know, I
genuinely
know, I know.
that, or maybe they didn't want me there, but that's not what they
No,
said.
no, I know. I'm just thinking that would be how I would do it. So what do you make of that? Because it sounds like you felt like your calling, you felt like your path was to stay there, and then here you have the leader of the place telling you, "Hey, I think your path is somewhere else." Did you have, or did you have then, or do you have now, like any idea of, a path in life or a plan maybe that God has for you? Like, do you subscribe to any sort of belief like that?
Yeah, I do. Uh, I feel the longer I meditate, I think I'm in my 53rd or 54th year of meditation, the more I feel guided at every moment. And I think a
Mm,
lot of people feel that way. I think it's inherent in every human being. The problem is the voice is speaking often, maybe at every moment, and you've got your headphones and you're listening to something going out in the world. What I've discovered from teaching people in meditation is that there's the subject, which is us, and then there's the object, which is happening everywhere out in the world. And for 99% of the world, the object is overcoming the subject to the point where the subject does not have a chance to experience who it really is at its deepest level. So, what meditation does is allows you to experience the subject while temporarily the object is not so overpowering you so much. And that's what happens when I teach the vets, is that they experience a part of themselves that maybe they've never experienced before, which was never affected by their trauma, which is innocent and pure and uh, in some ways unbounded, not affected by all the boundaries that their experience has put in front of them. And when they experience that, even briefly, it's like a reset. And it's not like whatever happened to them that caused their trauma goes away, but their relationship to it is different. So after you've been meditating for a while, the subject doesn't get overwhelmed by the object so much. And that's where freedom starts. And that's where peace starts with the vets that we teach.
There's so many similarities with everything that you're sharing and everything that I believe from my own personal path, specifically with Bhakti Yoga, and then with the work that we do with psychedelics. And rewinding a moment, you're talking about people going down one path of drugs and you finding a more spiritual path. And I just want to, I would be remiss not to say that the two are not antithetical, because I feel like the path of psychedelics can be a very spiritual path when it leads to the exact realizations and revelations that you just described.
I couldn't
So,
agree with you. I teach
okay,
many
good.
had their beginning of their spiritual journey on a psychedelic experience, and uh, yeah, no, I think we're in complete agreement.
Okay. Everything that you were just sharing, I was reminded, one of my biggest spiritual teachers, these two gentlemen who have a podcast rooted in the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhakti Yoga. And what one of them describes is his definition of what yoga is. He says that yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. And to me, that's exactly what you just described that you're helping people with meditation, where we have this obstacle of our mind being pulled in all of these different directions or focusing on these external things or ruminating on the past. And by bypassing that, we can experience our own true nature. And for someone who's experienced trauma, their true nature is them before being traumatized. It's the part of them that didn't have these horrible things happen to them. And for some people, that's going back such a long time that they don't even really know who they are when they subtract those experiences. So we're getting slightly ahead of ourselves getting into all this veteran stuff with trauma. I still want to hear about your path as a meditation teacher. So you leave the monastery and go do what from there?
Uh, I taught for a year to kind of get my taught school for a year to kind of get my feet on the ground and get some money together. And then I had left in the middle of getting a degree at Yale, and so I went back and did a third year at Yale and taught a lot of meditation actually at Yale, and also was a hospital chaplain for 9 months and
Hmm,
finished off my degree, my academic requirements. And by that time, that book had been published that I told you about with Thomas Keating. And I was asked to join an emerging publishing firm in New York, which dealt with books on spirituality and spiritual growth, called Amity House. And I worked there for a little while and got more interested in business. Uh, Kind of the meditation and the business were two different parts of my life. Eventually, I became a business consultant. Eventually, I got involved in the investment business and was involved in banking and the investment business for like 30 years. I'm kind
really?
of retired from that now, but yeah, that was the other side of my life. Never stopping teaching meditation and breath work while I was doing it.
Yeah, meditation doesn't quite pay the bills the same way a career in banking would, I imagine.
Right. And I was married for a very long time and had a family to support. And so the banking and investment business helped do that. And
Did you
also there
ever
was a
feel?
really interesting interplay because people that I was doing business with found out I was a teacher of meditation and wow, can you teach me how to meditate? And people that I was involved in meditation with wanted to learn more about business. So the two kind of fed into each other.
Okay, I was going to ask if you ever felt like those two worlds were at odds with each other, because we have banking and finance is sort of like the most materialistic sort of thing that society could be doing, and then we have the most transcendental thing that you could be doing with the meditation and the breath work. So you never felt like those were competing interests in your life. You felt like they actually worked hand in hand together.
Well, it wasn't quite as smooth as that, but yeah, most of the time I did feel like it. And it sounds like you had some familiarity with the Bhagavad Gita. You know, go back 1,000 years, 10,000, 5,000 years. And Arjuna is confused about what he should do in the world, right? And what does Krishna say? He says, Yogastha Kuru Karmani. If you're confused about what you should do in the world, go inside. And from that deepest place, act out. Don't be confused. Don't be inactive in the world. Find your dharma, find what you're supposed to do in the world, but let it be guided by your inner experience. And that was the way it worked out in my life. So I
Hmm,
never felt like the two were at odds with each other. As long as I was rooted in the inner experience, it actually guided me pretty well through business.
I like that. You've got me beat on the Gita knowledge. I can't quote the Sanskrit to you.
I, yeah, don't ask me to do that very often. I can't quote very much Sanskrit, but that one phrase, when I heard it the first time, made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I like that. Um, okay, so at what point did you start traveling? 'Cause I know you've been to some other countries, learned from some things from teachers around the world, right? As well as got into playing and recording music. So how did that fit into the picture?
Well, I've been meditating for about, let's see, about 17 years. And I met a particular spiritual teacher from India. His name was Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. In those days, he was called Pandit Ravi Shankar. And at that time, I was living in Santa Barbara, California, and I was a principal in an investment business. Had a nice life. I was living on the beach, had a nice little cottage on the beach. I was doing that work. I was meditating. I was not, and teaching some meditation. I was not an unhappy person at all. And I met this spiritual teacher and went to his course that he taught at the University of Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara. And he taught a particular breathing technique called sky meditation. And even though I had been meditating for a long time, the first time I practiced this meditative breathing technique, I went deeper in meditation than I'd ever gone before. And I used to have experiences as a young child, which I think probably many young kids have, where I go out on my bike. I lived in the country in upstate New York, be by myself in nature. And at a certain point in riding my bike, I'll never forget, maybe I was 6 or 7 years old, the me that I thought was me disappeared. And I kind of disappeared into the woods and the sky and everything that was happening around me. And this incredible joy just welled up in me. And I felt so free and so joyful. And as I got older, that experience, for various reasons, kind of went into the background or disappeared. And I always remembered it and I always longed for it because that was who I discovered in those moments that I really was. And when I did that breathing in 1988 in the summer in Santa Barbara, I went deeper in meditation than I'd ever gone. And it was like I walked through a door and that young boy was still there and that experience came back to me.
Hmm.
And just tears were pouring down my face. I was, breathing and I had my eyes closed, but I had this experience of such joy and such gratitude and such fulfillment that I thought if I could help one other person have this experience, my whole life would be worthwhile. And so there wasn't really an organization at that time. There was just a person teaching, but I went on some other courses with him, and eventually an organization was founded, which is now called the Art of Living Foundation. The next year, I learned to teach those techniques, and I've never looked back. And that's when I started teaching all over the world. And now
Wow.
there's, I don't know, tens of millions of people that have learned those techniques.
It was called Sky meditation?
Sky breath meditation, right?
Sky breath meditation. I've never
If
heard
you
of
look
this.
at artofliving.org, you'll discover all about it.
I should say I have heard of it just looking at your website earlier, but aside from that, I've never seen anyone teaching it. I've never done it. Um, hmm. What you shared about the bike ride experience, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of value in like low intensity cardio like that, like going for a run or going for a bike ride through the woods that does clear your mind in a unique kind of a way. And this is a bit of an aside. There's this music artist I'm obsessed with. His name is Akira the Don. He takes recordings from other people, like he takes lectures from Alan Watts, and he cuts it up and composes it into music. And I was on a bike ride one time listening to this album from Alan Watts, And I had a moment similar to what you're describing, where I completely called into question everything I thought I knew about myself. And I can pinpoint that as the exact moment I decided to start a family, where I went from thinking that I never wanted to have kids to completely being dedicated to becoming a dad. And it was all because of listening to this Alan Watts lecture while on a bike ride through the woods in New Jersey. So I like that. So maybe I need to try the sky breath meditation thing because I don't have a good place to ride my bike anymore through the woods. So maybe that'll get me back into the same kind of place.
Absolutely. It's a very easy technique, and it's very, the breath is something which everybody's already doing, and it's something that's very accessible to vets, for instance. Vets have some of them, feelings about meditation and what's appropriate for them as military people, but they're already breathing. And what we tell people in the vets course to begin with is that most people are only using 30 or 40% of the breathing capacity. So we
Mm,
say to them, how would you like more energy? You learn to breathe better, you're going to have more energy. Also, one of my first service projects after I learned to teach the breath work uh, was working with AIDS patients. And this was before there were AIDS medications. And a lot of them were not going to live very much longer. And what they discovered when they learned these breathing techniques is that their T cell counts went up, their immune
mm,
systems. So a lot of vets have struggles with their health. So then we say, how would you like to learn to breathe so that you get better health? But the most important thing that we teach them is that there's a hidden function with the breath in that it has a deep hidden connection with both the mind and the emotions.
yep.
So you've probably seen, David, that you're in a room with somebody and he's trying to be polite, but he's really upset. Maybe you've never had this experience, but I've had it many times, especially in business. And they're trying to control their emotions, but their breath is going like, and you know what's happening inside them, right? Uh, or if you watched your wife, I don't know if your wife sings your daughter or your son to sleep, but when she does that, you can feel the breathing slow down and finally the child gets to sleep.
Hmm.
So people see it in the moment, but what they don't realize is that you can learn certain rhythms of breath that'll bring you back to a quiet, centered place no matter what's going on in your outer life. And it's a terrific preparation for meditation because from that deep centered place in the breath, you drop immediately into a deep place. So even the most stressed out vet, I've had people that have been taking medications that haven't slept through the night since they've come back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And after the very first day of this course, they're sleeping through the night. And I knew somebody that was on 20 different medications for 40 years after Vietnam, and they're now medication free. So this particular technique is very powerful for everybody, but especially for people who've had a lot of trauma.
Yeah, I remember when I was in, maybe this was way back in college. 'Cause by training, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. So I had all these classes on exercise physiology, all these kinds of things. And I remember learning about how the breath is sort of the only system that has both autonomic and voluntary control, meaning you can't voluntarily control your heart rate like directly, but we can voluntarily override our natural cycle of breathing. So it becomes this sort of way to interface with your autonomic nervous system, which it's fascinating to me, that connection. Inside our program, we focus a lot on journaling because I feel like journaling is one of the best ways to get your conscious mind into direct dialogue with your subconscious mind. And the breath is sort of that same tool as it pertains to your physical body. So it is the sky breath meditation, is that the primary thing that you guys teach? Or are there other types of breath work that you work with, or is it mostly just centered in that one school?
No, I actually teach 9 different courses in the art of living.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
it's breath work, but there's different kinds of. There's a mantra meditation that they learn after the breath work,
Okay.
some yoga postures, many different kinds of things. If you studied sort of the keystone or the cornerstone of all of yoga and meditation, it comes from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and he talks about 8 limbs of yoga, and it includes pranayams, it includes breath work, it includes meditation. It includes actually some codes of conduct, the yamas and the niyamas.
Hmm.
And so I teach courses based on that as well. But for instance, in the new year, right around New Year's, I'm going to teach a course which involves breath work and meditation, but also 7 days of silence. Silence is another really powerful experience.
Man, I want to do a silent. I want to do a silence retreat so badly. One of our friends is doing like a darkness retreat. My wife and I were just talking about this. I'm like, I have no interest in that at all, but I definitely want to try a silent meditation. I think that would, honestly, I think I would have a really hard time with that. It's just something I've noticed in myself, this aversion to being in silence. I think, especially nowadays, I've got an AirPod in for this conversation. I'm just constantly listening to a podcast or music in the background. There's no good reason for that, man. Like I wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I can just be quiet when I make my cup of tea, but instead I have this predilection, desire to pop in an AirPod and listen to someone else talking just to fill that silence. And I'm someone who teaches this stuff to other people, and I still feel that way.
I
What do
understand.
you make of that? What do you make of that, John? Why do you think that we are that way? Because I think the average human finds silence very difficult. Why is that?
First of all, I want to challenge you because some of my best students say I could never be in silence. I could never do this.
Oh, I
And
could do it. It would be challenging, but I want to do it.
they end up being my best students. They end up enjoying it, appreciating it the most. I think there's two things, David. One is that the outside world has such a hold on us that it's overpowering us with stimuli that we identify with that. This is who I am. I'm the guy who listens to the podcast. I'm the person that really likes to listen to music. We get a little addicted to it. The other thing, and it's a little bit more subtle, is there are many ways to describe the human psyche, but a very, very simple one would be this is something that Sri Ravi Shankar taught me. You have a small mind, which is your ego, which gets you to do these podcasts and to put groceries on the table and to function as a normal human being. And we all need that small mind to kind of get around in the world. But there's also something deeper in us, call it the big mind. And when you start to experience meditation, sometimes the small mind gets a little alarmed because it's used to being in control. It wants to run your life. It feels like it's the thing that's keeping you going. And when you drop into the big mind, it can be a little unsettling for the small mind. So sometimes the small mind finds lots of reasons to be in the outside world, to keep stimulating you, to keep you with the illusion that you're under
Oh yeah.
control. But eventually, the big mind, when you've been meditating for a while, starts to seep in, even into activity, and kind of gives the small mind a little bit of balance. Does that make sense?
Mm. It does. It does, definitely. I'm sure you're familiar with the metaphors all throughout the Gita and other literature of like the horses pulling the chariot, where we think that we're the chariot driver and honestly, I'm going to butcher the analogy if I try to explain it. You could probably explain it better than I could. But with what you were just sharing about the big mind and the small mind sort of perhaps feeling threatened almost, that it's like being asked to step down, right?
It's exactly right.
Are you familiar with Stephen Pressfield
I'm
and
not.
the book? Okay, you should look this guy up. Forget Sam Harris. Look up Stephen Pressfield. Um, he has a book called The War of Art. He has a multitude of books, but he talks about the resistance that people feel. He sort of personifies the resistance and he talks about it as a force of nature, just like there's gravity and electromagnetic forces, there's this force of resistance. He says that anytime humans are trying to go from a lower plane to a higher, whether that's starting a business, starting a diet, um, just cleaning up your house, like we feel this resistance to doing these things that we know that we ought to be doing. And as soon as we start on that path, that resistance actually intensifies because there's part of ourselves that's protecting us from perhaps the hard work that it's going to entail or having to sort of kill the current version that we are to become this next version. So that's a lot of what I heard in your explanation of the big mind and the small mind and why why I want to listen to podcasts first thing in the morning instead of sitting in silence because there's part of me that I don't know, doesn't want to give up the comfort of who I am now. I think that's a big part of it.
Your small mind is sitting on the throne.
Yeah. They're good podcasts, man. I'm listening to the history of literature, learning about ancient Greece.
In
It's
the
good
beginning of
stuff,
my
but still.
practice, when I am doing physical yoga, sometimes I'll,
Mhm.
listen to some contemplative music while I'm doing it. So I'm I understand completely.
All right, so you get into teaching this meditation practice, this breathwork practice. How do you classify it? Is there a difference even between meditation and breathwork? Do you kind of use the terms interchangeably? I just want to make
Well,
sure I'm using the right language to talk about what you do.
the two are very kind of simpatico and kind of connected to each other. Uh, I do call sky meditation, the breath practice, a form of meditation because it puts people in a very deep place very quickly, which is why it's so great for vets. But some people, once they're in that deep place, that meditative place, they want to go even deeper. And so they learn other forms of meditation that can take them even in a deeper place and then bring that meditative experience even more out into activity. So yeah, a form of
Okay.
meditation.
Okay. So when did you start working with veterans? Because I know that's a big thrust of what you do now. So how did that become one of your focuses?
Actually, it happened for me almost by accident. I'd had experiences with teaching meditation with people with trauma in my regular meditation classes, but another meditation teacher, um, a lady from Los Angeles, happened to be at a restaurant in San Diego. This is 15, 18 years ago, where she met a bunch of vets. I don't know if it was a bar or a restaurant, but she started talking to these vets, and they heard that she taught this breathwork meditation. And I don't know if they were kidding around with her or they were serious, but they're like, "Oh, you should come to where we are at this vet center and teach us meditation." I don't know if they're interested in her or they're interested in meditation, but anyway, there was an invitation.
Yeah.
And she took that invitation very seriously, and she called me. She wanted another teacher to go with her. And we went together to this place in Orange, California, a little above San Diego, and just taught them a few rudimentary breathing skills, like an introduction. And they were so interested, and the staff that ran the vet center was so interested that they asked us to come back. Could you come back and teach a course? And the results were just so profoundly transformative
Yeah.
that we decided to together to set up this organization within an organization within the Art of Living called Project Welcome Home Troops. And we just started teaching vets, learning more about it, teaching more vets, word spread. We had more vets around the country that wanted to learn. This is the time when people were really coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. And then something happened which was very profound. A researcher named Emma Seppala, who was then working both at Stanford University and the University of Wisconsin, decided to do a research project on vets. And I taught the course, and this other woman, Deborah Lanya, taught some of it as well in Wisconsin, so that the vets were taught over a 7-day period, and they had a lot of biomarkers research done on them before they took the course and then afterwards. And we were stunned to see that some of the most profound symptoms of post-traumatic stress dropped as much as 40% during those 7 days. And that was not the most profound thing that happened. The most profound thing that happened is that Emma Seppala, the researcher, Dr. Seppala, went back and examined those people 6 months later, and their markers were still low. And a year later, their markers were still low, which showed that there was some kind of long-term value to what they learned, whether or not they had practiced every day, just from what happened during those 7 days. So that research kind of went all over the place. And we started getting invitations to teach at vet centers around the country and work with the VA a little bit more. I still teach the vets course, but there's a woman named Leslie Moore who now runs that project, Project Welcome Home Troops. And actually, it's timely that we're talking about it because I've been invited to teach vets in Australia. I'm going there in the middle of January to see if it works with Vietnam vets from Australia as well.
That actually reminds me, I'm going to put you in touch with somebody potentially who is a Marine veteran and now is becoming a psychedelic therapist for veterans, and she just moved to Australia. So maybe you guys could link up and talk. Um, what exactly did you teach this cohort of people? So in the study that you described, where you just taught them a 7-day course and they had all these changes, what was the curriculum, or like what kinds of skills did you guys actually cover in that?
We did some physical yoga, hatha yoga. We taught them 3 different kinds of breath work, including the sky meditation in an intensive way. They also did some things that you found helpful. They did a little journaling after the breathing to kind of get some connection to what had happened to them. They had a little homework. They had some interactive experiences with each other. to talk about what had happened to them in their trauma and how they felt about it now. And they also had some time to rest after the breathing. All those different things together every
Okay.
day, 7 days.
So what do you think, how would you explain the mechanism by which this worked? Because I'm sure these are people who've probably been through therapy and maybe been on SSRIs and things like that. And now here you guys come and teach them some fairly basic things over the course of 7 days that put them in touch with their mind, their breath, and their body. So, like, why does that have an effect? Ha What's the mechanism underlying the fact that this stuff seems to work so well?
This particular form of breath work, Sudarshan Kriya Yoga, sky breath meditation, looking at our own selves in a very simple way, we could say that there's 7 levels of our existence: the body, the breath, the mind, the intellect, memory, ego, and then something deeper. We could call the big mind, you could call it anything, the being. And what happens when you practice sky meditation is that you go through all those 7 layers of existence, they all get balanced, and then it allows you to drop into that 7th layer of existence, the being, the Brahman, the unboundedness, and come out with that experience along with those other 6 layers of existence out into activity in a very profound way. I taught somebody who had been practicing Zen meditation for like 30 years. I don't know if you know much about Zen meditation, but it involves a lot of concentration and a lot of effort. And the thing that he found when he practiced the sky breath meditation, he said, it's so easy. He said, in like 10 minutes, it gets me to a place which took me a really long time to get to. So it's very profound, especially for people who have been traumatized, who have a hard time being in the present moment.
Mm.
You know, when you get an experience of PTS, and I'm not telling you anything, you know all about it already, that experience overwhelms you in the moment. It freezes you in that moment. And it's very hard for you to experience other present moments because your body's always trying to get back to that to process it. It's like a computer that keeps trying to reboot after it's been thrown off its program. And what happens is when you practice the breathing, it's not like that experience didn't happen, but you go through all those 7 layers of existence, you hit that unboundedness, and it reboots everything, even the trauma. Most of the trauma that I've experienced vets having is buried deep in the body. And they get some relief from drugs and from talk therapy. But my experience, and there was another research study done at Stanford, which found that this breath work was at least as valuable, maybe even more valuable than talk therapy. So it's being
Doesn't
integrated,
surprise
this
me.
body mind stuff is being integrated in the same way that the micro psychedelics, other people are working with that, to get people out of their normal framework and into something that frees them from that trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would call this, somatic practices or embodiment practices nowadays. You guys are just doing this stuff before it was cool. I want to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Um, no, I just wanted to take us on a detour for 5 minutes. That's probably going to alienate the majority of my listeners. But you've been talking about sky yoga. I thought that was just called that 'cause, like, there's the sky, but it's an acronym for Sudarshan Kriya Yoga.
Sudarshan Kriya Yoga, right.
Okay.
Sud is Sud is a Sanskrit word which means proper.
hmm
Darshan means vision,
hmm
and yoga is obviously union. So it gives you a vision of who you are deep inside.
Okay. Is- Again, alienating the majority of listeners. Is it related to like the Sudarshan chakra, like Vishnu's like weapon that he carries, or is it just like the good vision? I'm sure there's probably some carryover, but
If there's an infinite uh, overlay to the universe in very different religious and spiritual traditions, that often comes in three. You know, I was raised in the Christian tradition, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the Vedic tradition, those three are called Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And Vishnu is the preserver, the protector, the maintainer. And a lot of people feel like, finally, I have been nurtured, I've been freed, I've been protected from those experiences. That's the reality of this energy that's come in.
mm, I like that. And I can see how that would be, without having experienced this, I can imagine how it would be more effective for somebody like this than Zen meditation. Because my understanding of Zen, at least, like you said, it's like effortful, where you're perhaps contemplating like these Zen koans and trying to make sense of things and it engaging the mind in that way. Whereas perhaps the sky meditation actually like cuts through the mind to access what's beneath that or something much deeper than that and just a
Yeah,
lot more
I,
quickly perhaps than
I'd
you
be
can do with
careful to
Zen.
say that there's different paths for different people,
Of
and for
course.
some people, Zen meditation has been enormously powerful. For a lot of vets, it's just different folks, different strokes for different folks. And what we found is the sky meditation for people who are already practicing another form of meditation, it's a great gateway into deeper experience of that meditation. A lot of people, I've taught a lot of Christians in the Catholic Church, and their biggest barrier to prayer is what they call the monkey mind. You know, they can't get their mind off of whatever, and they think somehow they have to silence their mind or get all their thoughts out of their mind. And what they find when they practice sky meditation is that it brings them to this place where prayer becomes very effortless, very easy.
Mm.
So it's for all kinds of people and all kinds of different traditions. It'll put a fire in any hearth. It'll work for anybody, just on the basis of the human nervous system.
Okay. All right, let's get back on track instead of my interest in Sanskrit etymology. So, you talked about how a lot of this trauma is like stored in the body. And again, that's a very common popular idea now. There's the book like The Body Keeps the Score that I feel like really popularized this and kind of put it into the zeitgeist. And that's something we have certainly seen on our retreats. Like for instance, we run a jujitsu and healing retreat for veterans and first responders, where we microdose with psilocybin, we train jujitsu, we do some cannabis assisted yoga, and we do a holotropic breathwork ceremony. And I actually want to ask you if you're familiar at all with holotropic breathwork specifically. You're nodding your head, yeah.
A
Okay,
lot of holotropic breathwork practitioners
cool.
and teachers.
Okay. So we've had people come on this retreat who didn't even engage in the plant medicine side of things because they're an active duty cop, for instance, and they just don't want to get in any legal trouble when they go back home. And those people have still had like completely profound, life changing experiences from nothing but the breathing. And some people in our Temazcal as well, which is a traditional native Mexican sweat lodge ceremony. And those are always my two favorite parts of the retreat because we get this room full of big, tough, tattooed up operator type dudes who are all just reduced to a sobbing puddle on the floor by the end of this breathwork session. So, can you speak a little bit to that? Like what's your conception of the trauma being stored in the body maybe and how does breathwork access that and how does it help people to process it and release it? Because I think for some people who haven't experienced this, that sounds really, really weird. Like this one guy that I'm thinking of in particular, he's a cop and he came to this retreat just for the jujitsu. I always joke like we lure people in with the jujitsu and then we trick them into doing all this other healing stuff. And that's the guy who had this life-changing experience and is now meditating every day and journaling and all these things. So how would you break that down for somebody who's hearing that and is like, man, this is some hippie nonsense? How do you make sense of all that?
Yeah. The breath, as we said earlier, has a lot of mystery to it.
Mm.
There's a lot more to what happens in our breath. And the particular rhythms that happen in sky breath, which I think differentiates it from holotropic and other things, allow people to go through those other six layers of existence that I was talking about and hit that unbounded place. And when they hit that place, there's something that happens in the body, maybe that makes it finally safe for the body to be able to release that trauma. And yeah, I've had my share of people yelling and screaming and also crying, especially in the vets courses. And equally, we haven't talked about this very much. I spent the entire time in COVID online teaching frontline healthcare providers who had so much death in their life that in their professional life that they were shutting down and that trauma was going deep in their body. And so it's mysterious. You know, some people say it has to do with affecting the vagus nerve and all different kinds of physiological things. But my experience is there's something deeper than the physiology happening. and I feel it, some wholeness that rises up from the body that was always there, deep within the body, that allows this healing to take place. So I'm not exactly sure on the deepest level how it works. I just watch
Yeah.
it work again and again.
I I really appreciate that you're okay giving that answer. Um, we don't know anything, man. Like the more I've like actually learned, that's my main takeaway. I'm a doctor, right? I have a background in the human body. We don't know anything about how the body works truly. All the medications that we give people, we don't know, we don't really understand the mechanisms by which they work, and most of them don't even work in the first place. So I love that you're not trying to give a perfect scientific explanation. It is mysterious. And I think there's a lot going on that we don't have access to. And I think that's fine. We're like ants trying to understand the scope of the universe with very limited tools. So I appreciate that answer very much.
We don't have to understand how it works in order to understand that it works. And the
Hmm.
fact that science is verifying it, this study, University of Wisconsin and Stanford, has gone far and wide because it was very well done. And Dr. Emma Seppala has talked about it in many, many different forums. And so people that only understand science or want to be verified by science, they see that it works and they don't need to understand how it works either.
Yeah, I think the scientific research is necessary to promote the adoption of this. But like you said, it's almost like modern science is just confirming what a sage from India could have told you 3,000 years ago. Like we're not really discovering anything new at all.
Right.
Um, how does the music fit into your current practices? Like, do you do anything with music with helping other people heal, or is it just sort of a personal pastime of yours?
No, I've always been involved in music. I was in choirs when I was little, and I was working in a camp as a teenager, early teenage years, for kids with muscular dystrophy, and in the Adirondacks. And somebody that worked with me played guitar, and I saw that it had an effect on the kids. So I learned to play at that time, but mostly for my own benefit. I played in coffee houses in college, and did all that kind of stuff. But then I started to see how music in groups of people had a profound effect on people. Number one, it brought people together. Number two, when people sang together, it dropped them from their little light bulb heads into their hearts. And number three, especially when the music involved them singing, and especially singing in ancient languages, which were powerful, Latin, Hebrew, Sanskrit, that those kind of experiences were meditative in themselves. And so, in the art of living, in the midst of the breathing and the meditation, they had some of those sessions. And I got pulled out of the closet as a guitar playing musician and started playing in some of those sessions and singing in them. And, I've probably sung in 30 countries around the world now for lots and lots of people.
I haven't had many personal experiences like you're describing, but I listen to a ton of kirtan music, and I there's something very special about that. We have a harmonium in our house we hardly ever use.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I just bought we just bought our daughter a piano that she's still too young for. She just kind of smacks all the keys at once. But I'm really hoping to foster some musical ability in her because I certainly have none whatsoever. But I've had some interesting experiences in ayahuasca retreats actually, where I sang for the first time, and there is something extremely liberating about that. Just about using your voice as that, I don't know, to express something that's within you. Like we talked about reaching those deeper layers of your consciousness, sort of behind the meat suit that we wear and behind the I that I think that I am. I think that singing can be a very powerful tool for that, but I don't know. I've only gotten glimpses of it. I still have some weird hangups around it myself.
Those ancient sounds have particular effects. And they have an effect in dropping us to a deep place and opening up deeper spaces within us and spaces that have a lot of energy. And also, some of those sounds, when we sing together with other people, they radiate out into the environment. and have a very positive, profound effect on the environment.
Mm.
So singing, especially the kirtan you were talking about, is one of my favorite things to do in the art of living.
There's it's I'm sure you know this. People talk about how chanting the Hare Krishna mantra just by speaking those syllables out loud, it's like everything around you becomes purified and touched by those sounds. I mean, that's the name of our company. It's called Becoming Om because you know, Om is the primordial sound of the universe. Everything is contained within it. And a lot of our work is helping people remember their true nature. So becoming that primordial sound Om. That's the idea. It was named by my wife.
I
She's
think
the yoga teacher,
it's
one
a
of us.
great sound. My congratulations to your wife. And you're
Thank you.
right. Om is the finest. If you know, modern physics says, unified field theory, that everything in the universe is just vibration. It's
Yeah.
energy.
There's some very interesting stuff when you start looking into cymatics, which is kind of the study of those vibrational patterns. There's some interesting work where you can visualize the frequencies. If you put like sand on a speaker and you play different frequencies, you can see the patterns that it creates. And a lot of them are actually represented in the architecture of ancient temples and even like like older Catholic uh, churches. I don't know why I was drawing a blank on that word. Thank
Cathedrals,
you. Yes. Thank you. That's exactly the
sacred
word I was looking.
church, and places like that. Right.
Exactly, exactly. It's fascinating stuff, man. Um, I like that. I wish I knew how to play guitar. It's not
Never
too
too
late.
late. Like a young man, it's never too late.
I'm trying to teach myself on my my daughter's little this piano I bought for a 2-year-old. My hands barely fit on it. Like we have it, I might as well start playing with it.
I know.
Oh man. John, so what does the majority of your work look like now? So like you're traveling to teach the meditation and the breath work. Is that kind of what keeps you going mostly right now?
Yeah. A lot of the courses that I teach are for people who are already doing meditation and breath work and want to go
Okay.
deeper, like this 7 day silent retreat or this retreat that I teach based on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Uh, it's very interesting. He talks about the yamas and the niyamas, the codes of conduct, and then learning. It's sort of a progression, although for a lot of people it happens all together.
Mm.
Pranayamas, the breath work, the meditation. And then what Patanjali says, when all of those things happen, especially when they start happening together, something even deeper happens. And he calls that Siam, where people develop intuition in a very deep way and also various other abilities. And it comes right at the end of the Yoga Sutras. He's a little bit vague about how it happens, but some of the courses that I teach now have to do with exploring those areas of reality.
What was the term that you used? Siam?
Or Sanyam, Sanyam. He talks about it at the end of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Okay. I'm gonna have to look this up. Um, hmm. What do you think? Because you've seen so much change in this field and how it's approached, and also just the more widespread adoption of it over the decades. And nowadays, like breathwork isn't really anything extraordinary, right? I actually think perhaps people are open to it because they see things like box breathing being used by elite athletes and by Navy SEALs and things like this. So it's become kind of normalized. I'm wondering, in your experience or in your opinion, do you feel like it's kind of lost some magic because it's become almost like secularized in this way, where we're just trying to get the physiological benefits without any of the spiritual side? Or do you still see that as a positive because it means more people are doing breath work, which is a good thing by itself?
Um, you know, however people get to that deep place, it could be through a spiritual, so-called spiritual path or spiritual endeavor, or just sitting in a room at a VA. That place that they get to is inherently spiritual, or however you define spiritual. Spiritual is who am I? Science is like, this is what Sri Ravi Shankar says. Science is like, what is it out in the world? How do we describe it? How do we uh, understand it? Spiritual is who am I? And
Mm.
when they get to that deep place and they discover, wow, this is who I really am, whether they start out that way, they end up having a more spiritual, what you might call a more spiritual understanding of the world, whether they started out wanting that or not. Even vets, very many vets have that experience. Wow, there's something in me that's greater than me. It goes on forever. What does that mean? Who am I really? What does that mean? People have those experiences all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So it's whatever sort of pathway gets you there. Hmm. Something that I think about a lot, not that we necessarily teach this directly, but I feel like this is one of the underlying mechanisms by which this stuff works, is as somebody starts on this path, they start to question the identity that they thought they had. So just as you said, doing this work, it leads you to ask this question of like, who am I really? And like, what is really underneath this? Again, especially for somebody who's experienced trauma at a young age. And we know now that the majority of people who get PTSD from their career, usually they had some sort of triggering event as a kid. A lot of times that shapes their personality. It shapes who they are, their likes and dislikes. It shapes how they speak to other people. It shapes their relationship patterns. And that all sort of crystallizes into the idea of who I think I am. And then when you start going down this spiritual path, it really calls that into question, especially if you have this deep meditative experience where you're all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm something much greater and much more connected than just this dude who grew up in New Jersey who likes Taylor ham and pizza and stuff like that. So I don't know. I've seen it almost be it can almost be a destabilizing thing for a little while, perhaps where there's this period of like turbulence when everything that somebody is being called into question. Have you seen that also just with the meditation or
All the time, all the
okay,
time. I'll give you an idea of someone that I worked with. It was someone who had been ordered to do something. This brings in another aspect of PTS, which is called moral injury.
yeah,
And he was ordered to do something that he really didn't want to do. He and his colleagues came upon some people, I think in Afghanistan. The father had a gun. They weren't sure if the father was Taliban or not, but because he had a gun, they considered him a combatant and they killed him. Unfortunately, the father was also a shepherd, I think, had two of his teenage kids with him. And the commanders thought, if we let these kids go, they're going to go back to the Taliban. And so he made this person shoot not only the father, but the two kids, which bothered him more than he could ever express. So his understanding of himself was as a guilty person who could never be redeemed.
mm,
He even said to me, he said, I don't know what I'm doing here. He said, I'm a walking dead man. Like the possibilities of him being a human being and having a normal life were gone for him forever. But when he practiced this form of breathing, he got to a place that was deeper than anything he'd ever done, who he thought he was. And it kind of gave him a little bit of a reset that there might be something more in his life than that overwhelming guilt which had frozen him in that moment. Does that make sense? It wasn't that
absolutely.
he stopped feeling some guilt or some responsibility for what he did, but it gave him some space, some possibility to explore being something greater than that. And that's why I keep teaching the vets when I have a chance. I don't have as much of a chance as I used to because I'm busy doing a lot of things. It's because it's the most rewarding, the most difficult work that I do, and also the most rewarding work because it gives people their lives back quite often. Does that make
Yeah, and
sense?
that's absolutely it does. And that's why we work with veterans and first responders and people like that as well. Um,
We're
and
in the
yeah,
same
that
business, you and I.
very much so, man. And we also kind of stumbled into this by accident. What you're sharing
Even
definitely
even
makes
though there
sense.
are no accidents in the universe, right?
Dude, absolutely. If there's one thing that my ayahuasca experiences have shown me, it is that their coincidences don't exist and that everything is unfolding the most perfect way possible in every moment. And that's a very difficult thing to still believe when things are objectively going really poorly, right? It's very easy to say, like, ah, yes, this is God's plan for me when everything's working out. But if God has a plan for you when things are good, God also has a plan for you when your friend committed suicide or when you lost your job or whenever you're going through the challenges in life. It's really difficult to maintain that perspective. But yeah, I've been convinced of that. Again, that Sam Harris guy, hardcore atheist. I got into psychedelics because of him, and my psychedelic experiences have given me like an unshakable faith in God and the plan for the universe and everything like that.
My grandmother used to say, God draws straight with crooked lines.
Say that
Even
again,
though
John?
God draws straight with crooked lines, even the most
Yeah.
unfortunate we go through, ultimately bring us closer to that reality.
That actually kind of brings us to something else I wanted to ask you about. So, one of the things that I think is necessary on this path is ultimately getting to a place where you can feel a sense of gratitude for the experiences that you've had, the things that you've gone through. And I'm gonna pause there for 1 second and confirm that you can still hear me because I think our connection's a little bit shaky. You got me, John?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right, good. So yeah, one of the places that we try to get to is where people can feel a sense of gratitude for the things that they've gone through and ultimately forgive whoever harmed them and let go of the stories that they carry associated with it. And that's a big ask for somebody, you know, to say like, ah, you should be grateful for being sexually assaulted when you were 5 years old. Like that's that's a hard pill to swallow. But I know that you talk a lot about gratitude. I think it's a big part of what you do as well. So how do you conceptualize gratitude just in general, but then especially gratitude for the challenging things that we've gone through that have shaped us into who we are?
You have to be careful. I have to be careful when I talk about gratitude. I think in an earlier conversation, we talked about three G's that I talk about in my course. And the first one is where most people live, which is the G of grumbling. This happened to me in my life. I'll never be able to forgive these people. I don't like my job. I'm not happy in my marriage. And they swim in that ocean 24 hours a day. But if they're able to find one thing in their life that they're grateful for, and for some people it's as simple as I'm still alive. I can't believe I've had a lifetime of drug abuse or this or that or the other thing. Just being grateful for being able to take a breath or being grateful for a child or something. It opens a whole new channel in their life. And then they start being able to be grateful for a lot of things. And scientists tell us that when we start being grateful, even for a few moments every day, a whole bunch of different physiological challenges, or excuse me, physiological changes happen in their life. And a lot of good things happen in terms of the way their heart and their circulation system happens. But then, in my experience, when they practice gratitude on a regular basis, a third reality starts to happen. And it has a religious connotation when I use it, but I don't use it in a religious connotation. The third G I talk about is grace, where they start seeing gifts being given to them that they never even knew that they needed or that came at the right time. Those unearned, unasked for gifts I call grace, which involves in a deeper connection with the universe, however you describe the universe. And when people start to live in that gratitude, grace causeway, miracles start to happen in their life, in my experience. And it happens over and over and over again. It's just getting them from that grumbling into feeling at least one thing that they're grateful for. I have to say, when we teach vets, there's this overwhelming gratitude that happens on the last day of the course because this great burden has been lifted from a lot of these people that they thought they'd never be able to let go of. They thought they'd never be able to feel joy in their life or have a connection with another human being in their life. And so that generates a lot of gratitude. And then what they want to do, vets being vets, immediately they want to give back. They want to tell
Yeah.
other vets about it. They want to volunteer. They want to. There's some of the most amazing human beings I've ever worked with. I love working with vets, and that's why I'm looking forward to meeting new vets in Australia just in the next month.
That is also something that we've seen where invariably someone has a positive experience and they're like, how can I help you? How can I work with you guys? How can I help you do this for more other people? And my first answer is always like, dude, let's slow down. Let's focus on you for a little while. Because also a lot of these people are people pleasers who don't pour enough into themselves. And that's almost one of the habits that we try to break them of is taking care of themselves first before worrying about everybody else. But can you break down for me a little bit more how you look at grace? So what did you say it was unearned, unasked for gifts from the universe?
Yeah.
Why unearned?
Some people feel like, depending on what religious tradition they grew up in, that they're inherently sinful or there's something wrong with them or they have a lot of guilt instilled in them as a young person for whatever reason. And so they sort of feel like they have to work for something good because they're inherently bad.
Mm.
And if the sky breath meditation doesn't teach them anything, it's that there's something wonderful and unbounded and unjudged and they leave their guilt behind in those moments. And that just shifts everything. Does that make sense?
That does, yes. And I would agree with that conception that, like, I don't know, that idea of original sin, it really rubs me the wrong way because I do think that our nature, I forget where this comes from, but I'm sure you know this, Sat Chit Ananda, right? Like being consciousness bliss. I feel like that is our true nature. Like we're here, we're aware of our experiences, and I think our true nature should be to be blissful. But yeah, we get this idea in our head that we're not deserving of good things, we're not deserving of love, we're deserving of the suffering that we experience. So that's why I push back on the idea of unearned gifts from God. Not that we should feel entitled to, get God's grace or anything like that. But
But we
I,
don't need to do anything to get it. We don't have to earn it.
right. Okay, okay, okay. All right. I'm on board with your use of the word unearned then, in the sense that, like, we didn't have to work for it. Not that we don't deserve it, but we didn't have to do something to then get the grace in exchange.
It's not even getting the grace. It's already who we are at that deepest level.
Yes. Okay. All right. All right. I get it. I'm sure you've heard this then or read this from Alan Watts. He talks himself into circles about God's grace because it's like, you know, if I am trying to change myself, how could I possibly change if I'm the one that needs changing? If I were capable of change, I would have changed already. So then the only alternative is I have to receive God's grace. But then if I'm waiting to receive God's grace, why haven't I gotten it yet? Do I not deserve God's grace? And how could I get myself to deserve God's grace if I'm not capable of change? And I actually don't know how he resolves that paradox.
It's,
Maybe you.
he was also, as I remember, at one point an Episcopal priest or a pastor or something. So he has that background in Christianity where God is, some person sitting up in heaven who's going to judge you and punish you and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And and when you get to that place deep inside you, all that gets left behind. I'm not commenting on anybody's theology, any, Christian, Buddhist, or Jewish belief about the nature of human beings. I'm just talking about people's experience on my course. It's very, very liberating. People feel loved. People feel that innocence that they felt as a child, and they feel unboundedness, and they feel something deeper than the trauma, the guilt, you know, PTS comes usually from one of three things: something they've done, someone they've lost, or even something they've seen that they can't get out of their brain. And when they get to that deeper place, those experiences lose their power over, they get to be able to go back into the present moment. They're not so completely preoccupied with those experiences,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, it does. Again, this is what we've seen with folks where perhaps there's a bit of like a misconception that people think in order to heal, or maybe it's like they'll never heal because these memories will always be with them. But the idea is not to erase the traumatic memories from your mind, but rather just to not live trapped in that mental and emotional state that those memories put you in. And that's definitely what we've seen with the breath work and meditation and various embodiment practices like the sweat lodge ceremony and things, where people can revisit those memories, but without the same emotional charge and emotional valence that they normally carry, and almost witness it as an outside observer. I bet you've seen similar things with the sky meditation.
All the time, and especially with that sort of people who are traumatized. Interestingly enough, my next course here in upstate New York is with women who have been physically and emotionally abused, and it's a shelter for them. And I've never taught that population before, and I'm looking to see how the techniques will affect those people.
Yeah, it's such a powerful tool. We again, I keep coming back to this retreat experience because that's where we like do the breathwork session specifically with people. Yeah, we've had women describe re-experiencing a sexual assault that they went through, but without any of the fear or guilt or shame associated with it. And then usually crying for a while and then feeling a lot better in the days afterwards.
It's great. It sounds like wonderful work you guys are doing.
John, one other angle I want to ask you about. It's kind of related to what we were just discussing with like the unearned gifts from God. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is a sense of self-worth and then extending that to self-love. And I'm sure you're familiar with metta meditation or loving kindness meditation. And I know there's different ways to teach that. The way that we teach it is we start off by imagining somebody that, someone you love, like your spouse, a partner, extending the loving kindness feelings towards them, and then a friend, and then a stranger, and then somebody who's wronged you or someone you actually dislike. And then we finish with thinking about yourself and using the mantra, may you feel love, may you feel peace, may you be free from suffering. And we do it in that order to almost highlight how easy it is to send this sense of love and peace to your partner or your best friend or your dog in some cases if someone doesn't have a human who qualifies. And then we try to wrap our heads around doing that to someone we dislike and then finishing with doing it to ourselves. Because in our experience, people have the most difficulty saying to themselves, may I feel peace, may I feel love, may I be free from suffering. And we do it in that order to highlight this mismatch where, like, I can get myself to say that to someone that I don't have a good relationship with, that maybe has wronged me or hurt me, but I have so much resistance to saying that to myself. So I know that there's different schools of thought or different people teach the order of that differently. So I'm wondering if that's something that you practice, like how you approach it and what you've seen with what I just described of like that difficulty of extending the love to oneself. Because I think that's a pretty important part of the whole healing process is getting around to that point. But it's a difficult journey for a lot of people to get there.
It is. This fellow that I worked with earlier in my life, Thomas Keating, was the spiritual director for literally thousands of people. And he was interviewed near the end of his life. And they said, what did you learn from all those years of spiritual direction? He said, the main thing I learned is that people are really hard on themselves. And it's hard. And what I've discovered is that there's some keys that we teach on this healing breath workshop, not just the breathing, but keys in terms of keeping that flow going in the outside world. One of them is, accepting people in situations as they are. That's one of them. There's other ones. And what I've discovered is that people meditating and they get rid of stress and they're following some of these keys, their relationships with other people get more harmonious and more productive and more effective, almost all by themselves over time. But after they've been meditating for a while, they have to come in contact with their relationship with themselves. And then they start to see some of the labels they put on themselves, some of the labels that other people put on them as children. And that's the work they do a little bit deeper in meditation. But I was stunned by two things that I remember from my first course with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. One was he said, you yourself are made up of a substance called love. Like you don't have to look for love outside yourself. It's there if you know how to find it deep inside. And the thing that really started me on this journey, it was a very radical thing that I heard on that course, even after many years of meditation. He said, the only true security that can be found in this world is in the process of giving love. And that really kind of set my head in a different way than it had been before. And so the place that love has in our own spiritual journey and in our experience of meditation is that it just starts to flow out effortlessly. It's there deep inside us. That's who we are. And eventually, even, we look in the mirror and we discover that we ourselves are worthy of that love, unconditional love. I don't know if that sounds like something out of a Hallmark card, but that's my experience.
No, man, at the point that I am at currently, I completely agree. When I first started down this whole path myself, I actually worked with a coach who worked with executive people to get the most out of their ayahuasca experience, all this nonsense. One of the things that he told me is that all of this work, it's all just about learning to fall more deeply in love with yourself. And at the time, I was like, that's fucking nonsense, man. That's not why I'm doing this. Like, I want to be a better business owner. Like, I want to be more successful, all this stuff. And now here I am teaching other people how to learn to love themselves more deeply. So he was onto something. But yeah, I feel like that's one of the biggest impediments, man, is again, this identity thing, this self-definition, when somebody doesn't believe that they deserve that, when somebody believes that they deserve the suffering and the pain and everything that they've been through, no amount of like good habits, no, I feel like no amount of sitting there and doing 10 minutes of breathing is going to get them to that place if we don't directly challenge that definition of themselves or that belief about themselves. I think it, as you talked about, the meditation is a window into that, but I don't know if that's sufficient. What do you think? Do you feel like that self-love is almost just a natural byproduct of doing these practices? Or do you feel like those practices are like a necessary but not sufficient path to get there?
Well, you ask really good questions.
I try, man. There's a podcast. That's the point.
Yeah, no, I get it. You're getting me thinking uh, about some of this stuff in a
Yeah,
different way. I think take vets. The guy who thinks he's a terrible person for having done that
yeah,
is irredeemable.
yeah.
He gets to that place deeper than he's ever gone before. In
Hmm.
Sanskrit word, they'd call it Shiva Tattva, that place of innocence and unboundedness. And I think in those moments, people finally feel like there's something more to me than what I've done or what I've seen. And a possibility exists. It's like an opening opens up. And I think a lot of people, vets would probably not say that, but it's like maybe it's possible that I could be loved in spite of everything that I've done. That there's a possibility that I could let go of that horrible feeling I have about myself, which if that's what causes people to commit suicide. So that opening gets there, and then as they do it more, they discover that they can love. I mean, I
Yeah,
taught a guy who lived in his basement for 5 years while his family lived above because he didn't even feel like he could connect to his kids. He couldn't. He was incapable of love. After
yeah.
the course, he moved upstairs. Like there was some possibility there. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
I I don't know if you answered my question either, but you gave me something to think about. Because I often, or I do feel that some spiritual faith in something, some faith in God, whether that's freaking Odin or Jesus or Krishna, whatever you want to ascribe to, I feel like that is necessary for this healing to take place like deeply. And I think you just hit on why with this example of someone who feels irredeemable, but it's only by realizing the connection to something greater that he feels like there is redemption for him. He can be a normal person again. And I don't know why the word that you used, irredeemable, that really struck me because there's isn't that giant statue of Jesus in Brazil? Isn't it literally called like Christ the Redeemer? And I'm not going to say that somebody has to embrace Jesus for this, but that's literally like right there in one of the epithets that God is there to redeem you of anything that you've done. That's very interesting. I'm going to sit with that for a little while.
Jesus said, he said, in the world you will find trouble. He said, but fear not, I've overcome the world. I think what he was saying is that there's a level of that connection to the divine
Yeah,
that supersedes that. He also said, behold, I make everything new.
yeah.
That experience
Hmm.
resets everything in my experience.
Interesting. Man, I don't know. I genuinely, I don't know what's going on with this, but there really seems to be a resurgence in Christianity in the world right now. And maybe that's just because it's also happening in my own life, so I see it more often. But I feel like that is a rising tide right now, and it's weird for me. I was raised Jewish, and then I got into Hinduism and Zen Buddhism and stuff. Uh, the last time personally that I did mushrooms, it was filled with imagery of like Christ on the cross and all of these kinds of ideas of like what that means to say that Jesus died for your sins. Like, what does that actually mean in my life? And that was really something that, I don't know, something that I was sitting with. And this conversation has just sparked that even further. So I don't know, man. It's interesting.
Certainly, I think Jesus came to show that, you know, ultimate nature of the world has to do with love, not judgment or condemnation or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And Christians would believe that he opened that possibility of the experience of God as love in a way that maybe it wasn't there before.
Mm, okay. I'm
It's
sure
about as
you're
far down
familiar
the
with.
road as I can go.
No, I like that. Maybe I'll start revisiting some stuff from Saint Francis of Assisi because I'm sure you're familiar with that. I feel like he was one of the biggest. I don't even know what you would call it. One of the biggest names in Christianity on that front of like specifically the loving, compassionate side of things, and that to know God is to love God, and that idea.
There's a guy named Richard Rohr who was a Franciscan. I don't know if you know him, and he
I
does
don't.
podcasts. He's very involved in the internet, and he's a very big proponent of going back to what Francis and Jesus said about, you know, God as a loving presence in our life.
I like that. And I think that's what drew me to Bhakti yoga, perhaps without even really understanding it, is that Bhakti is the path of love, right? And loving devotional service. And I especially love that idea because in Bhakti, right, Krishna says like the one who is dearest to me is not my devotee, but one who serves my devotee. And so here we are being in service to the people who were in service, right? To the service members who wore a uniform and went to war for our country or first responders. So that just tickles my brain a little bit with the bhakti connection between what you and I do. Um, all right, John, I do have to wrap this up because we actually have to go. My wife's teaching a yoga and breathwork session in an hour. So what kind of parting thoughts do you have for us? First of all, obviously, like where should we go to learn more about this? Because I want to try the sky breath meditation. But then what else do you want people to hear? Maybe that's misunderstood about this or just a message that people don't get enough that you want to voice right now.
I would like people to just pause and examine the possibility that there is something, a reality inside them, very easily accessible through the breath, that can not only relieve them of stress and tension, give them more energy and better health, better relationships, but can tap them into a source of consciousness, of awareness, of well being, of love, and deep connectedness to themselves and to everyone around them. That's very, very easy for them to access in a very profound way every day in just a few minutes. There's
Beautifully
nobody that
put.
can't benefit from this access to this deeper reality.
And it's right there with you at all times.
That's
That's,
right.
that's the beautiful thing about the breath. It never goes anywhere. All right, everybody. That's a wrap for this episode with John Osborne teaching us about meditation, about breath work, and talking about the Art of Living Foundation. You can head to that website to find out more about John's work, get in touch with him, and learn more about his meditation practices that he teaches. Thank you very much for listening. Do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you got any questions, if you want to learn more about how all of this stuff works. We are enrolling people right now for our mindful microdosing program. And probably by the time you're listening to this, there are no spots left for any of our retreats because we're going to take some time off next year to focus on our family. So if you want more retreats, send me a message and try to convince me to go back to running retreats. Until next time, peace out, be safe. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.